Okay, hello guys. I hope everybody's having a good week this week. We're going to study a little more about King David this week and about how David planned God's house. While David was the king, he wanted to build a beautiful house for the Lord. Instead of being a tent of cloth and curtains like the tabernacle Moses had made, David wanted to build a temple of beautiful and expensive materials. David wanted the very best for God. King David lived in a beautiful palace of stone and wood, while God's house was only a tent. David wanted to build a fine, permanent house for God. God did not want David to build the temple. 1 Chronicles 28:3 says that the Lord told David, "Thou shalt not build an house for my name, because thou hast been a man of war and hast shed blood." During his reign, David grew to depend on his army more than he depended upon God. The Lord told David in verse 6, "Solomon thy son, he shall build my house and my courts, for I have chosen him to be my son, and I will be his father." Have you ever been told that you couldn't do something, but that somebody else could? You were disappointed, weren't you? David had to be disappointed when God would not let him build the temple. But he didn't sit down and pout. He began working to do the things that God would let him and wanted him to do. God wanted Solomon to build the temple, but he knew that Solomon would need a lot of help, and David could provide much of that help well in advance of the time to actually build the temple. David obeyed the Lord. He did not begin the building, but he did begin gathering some of the materials, and he worked very hard on the plans. So here's a picture of that. He was studying plans. In addition, he started crews of men working, cutting wood, carving stone, doing beautiful wood carvings, and gathering silver and gold and precious stones for decorating the temple. In fact, he did so much work and made so many arrangements that it says in 1 Kings 6 and 7 that when Solomon finally built the temple, that everything was so completely ready that there was neither hammer nor axe nor any tool of iron heard in the house while it was in building. Everything was so carefully prepared that all they had to do was put it together. David wanted the temple to have great porches, upper chambers, inner parlors, and a place for the mercy seat. So a mercy seat is the lid of the Ark of the Covenant, a kind of throne for God, and the other items used in worship of God at that time. God told him how the temple and the furniture were to be built. There were many things to be made of gold and silver. There were candlesticks, lamps, tables, and many more things where gold and silver would be needed. Even the walls would be overlaid with refined silver. How beautiful the temple was going to be. David gave personally of his possessions. 1 Chronicles 29:3-4 says that David gave 3,000 talents of gold, which is a lot of money, and 7,000 talents of refined silver. There were also many other materials needed to build the temple. They would need marble, stone, iron, wood, and brass. There are many, many instructions for building the temple given in the Bible. In fact, there are so many it will be impossible for us to go into all of them. David was very thorough with his plans. He wanted everything to be perfect for God's house. Remember, he knew that Solomon, his son, was going to build the temple, but he was allowed to draw up the plans and gather the materials. Then he would turn it all over to Solomon. Before he died, David called Solomon to him, and in 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 2 and 3, he gave him some advice. "Be thou strong, therefore, and show thyself a man, and walk in his ways, to keep his statutes and his commandments." David said. He told Solomon to be sure to obey all of the Lord's commands. If he did, he would prosper. He also told Solomon to be strong. Obedience is a matter of love. As David also told Solomon, serve him with a perfect heart and a willing mind. And that's in 1 Chronicles 28 and verse 9. When we love God and our parents, this isn't hard to do. David ruled over Israel for 40 years. At his death, he was buried in Bethlehem, which became known as the city of David, and is the city where Jesus was to be born. David wanted the very best for God. We also should give our very best. The Apostle Paul wrote in Colossians chapter 3 and verse 23, "And whatsoever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not unto men." So that's the end of our Bible story, but then we have our application. We can't all be the pitcher in the baseball game. Someone needs to be the center fielder, The main thing is that we accept the fact that we are the center fielder and we do that job to the very best that we can. We need to give it all our attention, all our energies, and do our very best. After all, each position plays a very important part in whether the game is won or lost. Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 10 says, "Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might." Can you imagine how disappointed David was that he couldn't build the temple of God? Yet he didn't decide not to play. He decided to do everything he possibly could that God would allow him to do to help his son Solomon. Without David's help, the temple would have taken a lot more time to build. David couldn't say, "I built the temple," and he didn't get the glory, but he did have a big hand in helping build it. God knew all the hard work that David did. He also knew David wanted to build the temple for him. God also knows we all want to be the pitcher, but He also knows when we take the other or lesser jobs and do them the best that we can. God expects the very best from all of us, just like He expected the very best from David and Solomon and everyone before them. So let's try to be like David and accept what we can do and do it the very best that we know how. Thank you.